Welcome to our event. I'm Hannah. I run Labour Together, and today's event is going to be looking at new forms of organising. So we all know how much work has changed in the last decade. We've now got the rise of sort of zero-hour contracts, we've got platform monopolies, and the fact is that new forms of work need new forms of organising. So that's what the event here is about today. How are people fighting back? How are people organising today? And what kind of challenges does this kind of present for unions and kind of emerging unions like that? So we've got a really great panel here today, which I'm really excited about. We've got James McKenna, who's the Northwest Regional Secretary for the TUC. We've got Lucy Harley-McCohen, who's the author of Reorganise, which, if you haven't seen, is this book. It's got loads of stories about how people are organising in new ways in the digital age. It's really cool. There'll be a chance to buy this after the event. We've got Josh Simons, who's a research fellow at Harvard University and also the author of Algorithms for the People, Democracy in the Age of AI, and a trustee of the Civic Power Fund, which is a fund to support community organising across the UK. And then we've also got Tom Hunt, who's a senior fellow at Unions 21 and director of the Sheffield Political Economy Research Institute. And he's recently written some really interesting reports on unions and data and also organising in the pandemic among unions. So we've got a great panel, some really interesting thoughts. So to kick off, I think I'm going to ask James to have a chat to us about how the TUC has been supporting unions to organise differently. James.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and just firstly to say welcome to Liverpool. Hope you've enjoyed the hospitality so far, and I hope you enjoy it in the next few days itself. I'm from the city, based in the city, I'm from the city. Thank you for being part of the panel, and I think it's timely, isn't it? There's been if you've been following on social media, you've been following the mainstream news, you've been following the work of our trade unions. Some people call it a rebirth. I wouldn't quite call it a rebirth. I'd say there's been a rediscovery amongst more people of our trade unions and what they do, the importance of what they do, the importance of workers. And as somebody who got his first job at the TUC about 10.5 years ago, working on an organising pilot, I think a broader understanding of what it is to organise workers and what it is to bring workers together. I must say, when I first started at the TUC, I didn't know what organising was, but it turned out I've been doing it. I've been involved in football campaigning, bringing people together, football supporters, and I didn't know the terminology, didn't know what organising meant, didn't know what an organiser was. And I think lots of people, when they hear about these terms, and that's why the book really struck me when I read it, is it's a much simpler understanding for lots of people about what it is to organise. And I think that's what I'll touch upon, about what the trade union movement needs to do, particularly what the TUC and others are trying to do. Trade unions are very, very, very old institutions, over 150 years old. The TUC, many of our unions going back decades, if not a century or more. They have rule books, they have ways of working, they have committees, minutes. I'm the regional secretary. What on earth is a regional secretary? Because I assure you, I don't do all of the secretariat work that some of them might like me to do. What are these titles? What is it that we do? And I think that's the challenge we face now as a movement for the 21st century. Tech in the world of work has changed. There have been lots of questions about Uber, Deliveroo, all of these new forms, these new models, but you're not getting that genie back in the bottle. It exists, it's out there. It's also how some of us want to live our lives. I like the technology that exists. I like to know where my taxi is on its way. I don't like to be told it's 5 minutes away, 25 minutes later, and I'm still waiting. I like to know where things are. I want that instant gratification that we want. I want that instant information. But our trade unions are responding to that. And we are, by our nature, very reactive organisations. We have to respond to things that often occur in the workplace or in the political sphere. And I think we're trying to grapple with that now as trade unions. And I know colleagues in the digital team, John Wood, who's contributed to part of this book, are doing that with our affiliates. There's something that's mentioned in the introduction, and it's worthy of thinking about the start of that journey for someone joining a trade union. It should be simple to go on your phone and join a trade union. And sadly, for lots of our affiliates, it's not. The TUC, in the last 5 years or so, has undergone a significant change in how we do our campaigns and our digital work. We are digital by default now. We don't produce written reports of our work. We go online. Our congress is paperless. Little things that have taken an almighty amount of work to get people ready for that. But we're starting that journey. that people can get the information they need on their mobile phone when they need it. And our unions are sharing that information. There's a small working group of our unions, Unison and others, who are recognising that in some cases it took 15 clicks just to find out to join the trade union. And that was from someone like me, having to find it, to demo it and test it. Now, if I know where I ought to look, but it takes me 15 goes, it's going to take the worker who's got a problem at work and needs help and support there and then. They're just going to not do it. They're going to stop. They're not going to click through that many things, and that's understandable because I don't in any other walk of life. I give up that quickly, and we're responding to that. We're thinking about how we have the Netflix model that people can scale down their trade union membership according to what they need at any one moment in time, but providing that base level of support. But also grappling with how we produce technology that fits what people want. You know, people want collectivism. You're all in this room. People join political parties, they take part in demonstrations, they take part in action. They have inherently a sense of fairness and justice at heart about what's right and what's wrong. But do our models reflect that? I don't think they do. You look at this book, and I think it is about just slowly but surely sharing best practice with our unions, which is what we're doing, and there are new ways to do this. The pandemic's accelerated some of that. We can have online meetings, we don't need to sit in a closed, stuffy room. We're live streaming this, you don't need to sit in a room for people to take part. You can have discussions on WhatsApp, we can share information because we have to. And in a way, that's maybe one of the better things that's come from the pandemic for us all. It's accelerated some of this change that we like to see happen. And you look at what's happened in there, WhatsApp groups to organise things, people sharing information about what's taking place, Facebook groups. They're all how we live our lives. And that's what the TUC is trying to do. It's trying to bring our very, very large institutions, people at the very top, and not a criticism of anyone in particular. You know, people who've reached the level of general secretary, senior officers, who've been doing this job maybe for a long time in their trade unions. They joined the trade union, it was a very different thing. But it was in one workplace, when you went to these meetings, when you maybe had time to go to these meetings, you had more facility time, you had more access, the union was present and gave you those opportunities. And the world's very different now, people work in different workplaces. So it's how we connect. And our digital team is trying to do this. Lots of our campaigns now, we start digitally, our megaphone petitions, we share data very quickly with our unions to target people for those campaigns. This isn't a wide scattered one of sending out emails to everybody, we target that by postcode. We help our unions who are trying to organise in particular workplaces target things by postcode. That's what we're trying to do. I'd rather kind of maybe take some questions or anything directly want to do and certainly listen to the colleagues who've got their things, but we are responding to it. But it's not easy for all of the reasons I set out. It also costs a lot of money. And at the same time, our members, 5.5 million in the UK, want help every day. And if you're a union organiser or a union officer, and you're thinking about all the things that need to change tomorrow, today you've got a disciplinary, or a grievance, or a government that wants to attack trade union right, or a pay rise to be run, and all these other things, and it sometimes just takes a bit of time, but we are on that journey. Books like this certainly help us and think about this, and I would encourage anyone to read it, buy the book, but also think about how you might take away those experiences into your trade union, whether you're an active rep at the moment or not. Think about how you take them. Maybe you might be the person that helps generate the change in your trade union, because we can tell our unions what we think they ought to do, but I assure you, as the TUC, we have absolutely no power over our unions, and they decide what we do. It's they that hold the power, and their power ultimately comes from yourselves, and whether you branch reps, officers, or even just members of the union who can maybe encourage some change at your workplace, and hopefully in a couple of decades' time you'll be sat on one of these panels saying about how you've helped change the trade union movement for the 21st century and beyond.
Thank you so much for that, James. I loved what you were saying about, we live our lives on Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. Of course, our organising should take place there. I think that's a really good point. Next up, we've got Josh, who's going to talk through how sort of the digitisation of lots of work means that there's new forms of organising in the workplace and beyond. So Josh, if you'd like to.
Great, thanks Hannah, thanks James, and thanks for having me on this great panel. I'm going to leave it mostly to others who've studied it to talk about the examples of the new forms of workplace organising, and I'm just going to talk a bit more about the context in which it's happening. I'm basically just want to make 3 points. The first is about what's driving these new forms of workplace organising, and in particular why the underlying logic of data-driven algorithms and machine learning is really important to understanding the kinds of problems that are causing the organising that we're talking about. Second, I want to talk about some of the obstacles to expanding and growing and deepening this organising, and in particular, problem that James mentioned, the problem of funding. how you fund this work. And then third, I want to talk about why this new forms of organising matters for workers, for the country, and most importantly, for this weekend, for the Labour Party. So let me start off by saying something about what's driving these new kinds of workplace organising that we're talking about. The one thing that Uber drivers, that Facebook content moderators, that Amazon delivery drivers, but also people who work in call centres, retail stores and administrative roles, the one thing they all have in common is that their workflow, their working schedules, sometimes their pay and their rewards are decided not by human bosses, but by data-driven algorithms. These machine learning systems predict and track their productivity, their time spent on various tasks, where they are, and so on. And these systems depend on a lethal combination between two things: prediction, using data to estimate things like future performance or productivity, and measurement, tracking almost everything that an employee does, leaving them without privacy, independence, and judgment. And this combination between prediction and measurement is the core of what characterizes the algorithmic management of work. And resisting, shaping, and building power against this algorithmic management of work is one of the key drivers of this new wave of organising in workplaces. And a great example of this that James probably knows about happened literally a couple of weeks ago in the US. There were going to be US-wide rail strikes, and the big objection there was actually not about pay, it was about this data-driven point system that effectively dictated what time off workers had. And the problem with it is that it took no account of picking up your kids from school, it took no account of time off, there was no flexibility or humanity built into it whatsoever, and that was the problem that they were objecting to. So that's the first thing, data matters for what's driving these new forms of organising. Second thing is about the obstacles to expanding and growing and deepening these forms of organising. And I think there are basically two massive obstacles. The first is that it's really hard to humanise, to make physical and tangible some of the most awful effects of this algorithmic management of work. Algorithms seem like they're driven by data, but actually they're designed and they're built by people. But who those people are is often hidden, they're hard to identify, and therefore they're hard to hold to account. And this means that organisers have to work extra hard to identify where and at who to target the power they're building. But it's also this wider challenge of telling stories, given that so much of the power is exercised through data, through measurement and prediction. And that's why this new book, in my opinion, is so wonderful and important, because it's all about stories. And it's similar to the kinds of problems we have in talking about systemic racism. As an aside, it's difficult but vital to humanise and tell stories about it, and not just to talk about structures. The second challenge is about how organising is funded, and this is something that James mentioned. Sustainable organising has to be sustainably funded. It has to have sources of income that aren't going to suddenly stop for reasons that have nothing to do with the underlying organising or power being built. And that's hard, always, in all places, at all times, not least because the workers who most need organising are often those without the surplus income to pay for it. But above all, it's also hard because of the UK's Victorian, co-opted, mad system of civil society regulation. Most of the resources for funding early stage organising work are charitable, but according to the Charity Commission right now, organising and democratic participation are not charitable activities. There are lots of great organisations out there trying to address this problem, including the Civic Power Fund that Hannah mentioned that I set up. But the more imaginative we can be about how to get around that Victorian system of regulating civil society, the more sustainable the organising we can do and the power we can build will be. And this takes me to my last part, about why new forms of organising matter. Most importantly, organising in workplaces is obviously good for workers. As we all know, the more power is organised, the more it can be wielded to advance collective interests. But there's also a lot of evidence that it's good for the country. In the right relational and legal context, well-organised and well-represented workforces tend to advance productivity faster than those that are not organised and not well-represented. So it's part of what we as a country need to do to solve the UK's productivity puzzle. But as we're here at Labour Party conference, the point I want to end on is this. New forms of workplace organising matter because they are vital for the Labour Party's future. We often forget that the Labour Party was founded as the parliamentary wing of organised Labour. The organising in workplaces came first, then the political representation and structures came second. So to build an enduring electoral coalition, Labour must be rooted in organised interests, the organised interests of the future, and above all else, that means organising in workplaces. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Some really good points there, particularly about like the importance of organising for the wider economy. I think that's something we really forget about, and also like its own role in kind of labour history. And we all probably do need to have a look at ourselves and think, how are we renewing this for a new age? And what do we need to do that? So some really important points. I'm now going to bring in Lucy, who's the author of the book, to have a chat about some of the things that you learned from chatting to the people in the book, the stories in the book, and your thoughts.
Hello, thanks so much for coming. So when I first started this project, we were sort of doing a newsletter about grassroots activism in general, and as I was speaking to people, researching, finding new examples, the same thing kept coming up over and over again, and that was that people were unhappy at work, and that people were angry and wanted to do things to change their situation. And that is something that profoundly resonated with me as a freelancer, as someone who continually, got done over by massive multinational organisations who didn't pay me on time, who cancelled things in the middle of a contract, and I felt that I'm part of the NUJ, and they do a great job on multiple levels, but I felt that they hadn't quite nailed many of the things that freelancers need. It was on that basis that I started sort of researching and speaking to people, and we found that from influencers in LA to road workers in Manchester, people were having the same problems and feeling the same things. So I think that that says something about how people need unions still, but they don't know that they need unions still, So part of this, I think, is that with the rise of the internet and kind of services on the internet being sort of like fragmented, that also leads to kind of fragmented organising. So people don't come to like a one-stop shop to get what they need anymore. You might just need information about what other people are paid. You might just need to like find out about what one kind of like micro work thing has been reviewed as. The examples in the book speak to that. I think in a way that people are sort of looking for different things from unions due to the fact that work is changing and work has changed. That was the first thing I sort of felt when we were compiling the case studies. That's kind of what it's about.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a really good point about kind of the way that people are looking for different things and much more informal forms of organising. And I think like in the book, what's very interesting is that lots of the people doing these things might not see what they're doing as organising, but they're still kind of doing it. Particularly people like the road workers on Facebook, where they are literally just sharing information about how they feel their work is going. And that's very much kind of like before a union stage. But the question is, how do kind of bigger unions link into those kind of efforts? And is there any relationship there?
Yeah, and there are people that don't want to join unions necessarily. Among the people that I spoke to who'd done the most innovative things, they said that they wouldn't they might consider joining a union, but at the moment they don't want to pay however much a month because they feel that they can get what they need from like another thing. Like the road workers Facebook group, they discuss pay and conditions. They like sound out bad employers, and many of them don't want to be told by a union necessarily what to do or when to go on strike, or they kind of want to self-govern in a way, I think.
It's really interesting sort of how those kind of movements might be plugged into more formal unions. So I guess like the book is also like a chance to try and see what that intersection might look like, because we know that something needs to be built between these two things, but we're not very sure what it is yet. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm going to bring Tom in now, who's going to talk through some of the research that you've done with Unions 21 on how unions adapted during the coronavirus, and also some of the work on data in unions. You've got some really exciting reports out which you should all read.
All right, you heard it from Hannah. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak, and thank you, Lucy, for writing the book. I'm often struck that there's so many books and reports out there that are written about an abstract future of work, and the big changes in working life that we're told will come. Work 4.0, work 5.0, jobs in 2050, and they often talk about how work is changing, but they fail to state the bleeding obvious that work isn't changing fast enough for a lot of people, that pay is still crap and falling, terms and conditions aren't good enough, and there aren't enough jobs which offer secure employment. People want change. They don't want to be told about it, but it's coming in the future. This book is different though, and it's inspiring as a result, because it's completely grounded in the reality of work today in 2022. Yes, work is always changing, but yes, workers are always finding new ways to try to improve it for the better. Now, as Hannah said, I was asked to say a few words about some research that I've done with an organisation called Unions 21. Two bits that I've done the last couple of years. One is about how unions adapted their work during the pandemic, and you've heard some of that from Jay, and then second, about how unions are using data increasingly. On the first point, the pandemic, as Jay said, rightly sparked an acceleration of change within unions about how they function and how they organise. We saw mass rallies, branch meetings, national negotiations all taking place on Zoom, reps organising huge WhatsApp groups to organise within, investment in new websites, and a big shift in remote working. Now that all might sound like change that took place in lots of organisations during the pandemic, but it's worth repeating because it exposes utterly the myth that unions are somehow old-fashioned and resistant to change. They can, and they did change rapidly. Now you'll hear that myth in the press, and you do hear it regrettably in some parts of our movement. It's just not true. One person I spoke to said that it was like an electric shock through the union. Things that would have taken 2 years, 5 years, took 2 weeks, 2 months. Things happen quickly, and that genie's not going back in the bottle. Now, that's not to say that there can't be more change or even quicker change. And that connects to the other work that I've done, which is how unions are increasingly using data in their work. And there's lots of examples in the report, honourable mentions to community, prospects, the FDA, National Education Union, who are all thinking hard about this. Spoiler alert, I'm not a data scientist. It's actually a report about strategy, not really about data, because it's about saying, how do unions take a step back and ask, if we're going to achieve our aims, if we're going to be an effective union, what do we need to know about work today? What information do we need, and how do we get it? I.e., what data do we need? And that's what data is. Data is information, it's facts, it's figures, it's numbers, it's records that have been collected and then are analysed, and unions are increasingly doing it, and that's why the book is so relevant, because the case studies in here are a rich data set about work today. And so many of them, as has been noted, are actually about data sharing itself. You know, this Facebook group of 100,000 construction and road workers sharing information about who to avoid working for. Workers leaving reviews on Glassdoor. WhatsApp groups for employees in creative industries saying who to work for and what pay we should be asking for. This is rich information for all of us, but also for unions to learn about how work is changing. And it's information that unions can then use to help guide recruitment and also to target organising work. And for those of us who are in the Labour Party, and I'm a councillor in Sheffield, it's also information for us to think, are we tackling these issues that are in our cities and in our towns? But the challenge, as has been noted, is to encourage people whose work is kind of highlighted in the book, who may not be accustomed to unions, to sign up, and who may frankly question what they get for 20 quid a month that they don't already get from some of these other groups. To argue why low-paid freelancers should join a union, and then to make sure they're well supported when they do join. These are hard questions for all of us, but there's examples in the book, Bectu and Prospect, who are doing good work in this area. They're hard questions, but they shouldn't be ducked, because I would argue that despite achieving good outcomes, many workers in the book can probably only go so far, because outside of unions, they don't have the weight, the expertise, the legal protections that unions can provide. The challenge is obviously to close the gap, if it exists, between these new forms of organising and more older, established unions. It can be done through experimentation and trying things out. Some things might fail, but informed by data, they're less likely to. So I'll finish with a question that perhaps suggests how that could be done, which is in that Lads and Gangs Facebook group, there's a quote which stood out for me from the founder, who said that all the time they're getting recruiters and marketing companies contacting the moderators wanting to collaborate and to buy out the group. I bet they are, because that's a huge data set of people and information that they want to get hold of. What I thought when I read that is, have any unions approached that group and had similar questions? Now, as we've heard, some members of the group might not want to join, but I'd be curious to know if there's either unions who are thinking, how could we get hold of these people? What can we do to encourage them to join? And are there union members lurking in the group trying to sort of steer the conversations? Now, there's lots of information and examples in here that we can all learn from, but I would just echo, thanks to Lucy for pulling it all together, because it's a really rich resource for all of us. So thank you.